Margaret, 83 years old, was crying as she handed over the keys to the house she had lived in for 60 years. "I raised my children in this house," she said with a trembling voice, gently stroking the old door key with her fingers. Real estate scammer. Richard took the keys with a smile. "Don't worry, Ms. Margaret, your home is in good hands." But what he didn't know was that her neighbors, Clarence and Bob, were retired cops, and for 30 years, they had been fighting situations just like this. If you stand for justice for the helpless, hit that subscribe button and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. Elmwood neighborhood was one of the most peaceful corners of Detroit. Tree-lined streets, white-fenced houses, and neighbors who had been there for 60 years. Margaret and Harold Thompson had lived it for 128 since 1963. Margaret Elizabeth Thompson, 83 years old, was a retired elementary school teacher. She had taught thousands of children how to read and write over 40 years. Harold James Thompson, 85, was a retired Ford factory worker. He had worked in the same plant for 45 years, and together they had raised 3 children. But the last 2 years had been hard. Harold had been diagnosed with early-stage Alzheimer's. Margaret had a heart condition. And most importantly, their children lived in other cities and rarely visited. That Monday morning, while Margaret was pruning roses in the garden, the doorbell rang. Mrs. Thompson, a handsome man in a suit, was standing at the door. "I'm Richard Williams from Premium Properties. I have a very important offer for you." Margaret looked at him with suspicion. "An offer? We're not looking to sell our house." Richard smiled. He had been using that smile for 15 years. "Of course, you're not obligated to sell. I just want to help you understand the value of your home. Property values in this neighborhood have gone way up." "Harold," Margaret called. "Someone's here talking about real estate." Harold, 85, head slightly trembling, but still standing tall, came to the door. "What does this man want?" Richard jumped in. "Mr. Thompson, I'm Richard Williams. My company has been operating in this neighborhood for a long time. Your home is probably worth around $500,000. But at your age, maintaining a big house like this must be difficult, right?" Margaret and Harold exchanged a look. $500,000. That amount was astronomical to them. "So what are you proposing?" Harold asked. Richard opened his portfolio. "A special offer. We'll buy your house at market value, and in return, we'll provide you with a smaller, more manageable home, plus $50,000 in cash." $50,000 in cash? Margaret's eyes lit up. That money could mean Harold's medications, her heart treatments, and maybe a chance to visit their children. Richard's smile widened. This was the signal he had been waiting for over 15 years. "Agreed. Yes, and we can close the deal immediately. No red tape, no long waits." Harold was skeptical. "Isn't this a little too fast, Mr. Thompson? I've been doing this for 20 years. Trust is my currency. I can give you references." Richard pulled out fake reference letters from his portfolio. "Fake customer satisfaction reports. Fake company certificates. We need to think about it." Margaret said, "Of course, but deals like this don't stay open long. I've got other clients." After Richard left, Margaret and Harold sat in the kitchen. "Margaret, $50,000 is a lot of money." "I know, Harold. Your medications, my heart, and this house really is too big for us." They both thought about the home they had shared for 60 years. Their children, Lisa, Michael, and David's first steps, Christmas mornings, graduation parties, 60 years of memories, but $50,000. "Let's call him tomorrow with our decision," Harold said. What they didn't know was that just 2 blocks away in the same neighborhood, retired cop Clarence Henderson would have recognized the name Richard Williams, because 15 years ago, he had tried to catch Richard. Clarence Henderson, a 64-year-old tall black man with gray hair, had served 28 years in the Detroit Police Department. For the last 10 of those years, he'd worked in the fraud division. That Tuesday morning, while watering flowers in his yard, he saw Margaret crying. She was standing by her garden gate, holding a piece of paper, tears streaming down her face. Clarence rushed over. "Aunt Margaret, what's wrong?" Margaret looked at him. She'd known Clarence for 15 years. A good neighbor, a trustworthy man. "Clarence, I think we made a huge mistake." "What mistake? Tell me." Margaret looked down at the paper. In her hand, a real estate agent came yesterday. Richard Williams. He offered to buy our house. Said he'd give us $50,000 in cash. Clarence's expression changed. "Did you say Richard Williams?" "Yes." "Do you know him?" Clarence knew him all too well. 15 years ago, Richard Williams had been one of the most wanted con artists in Detroit. He targeted the elderly, buying their homes far below market value, then selling them for massive profits. Aunt Margaret, that man's a con artist. Margaret's face went pale. What do you mean, a con artist? I tried to catch him 15 years ago. He scammed dozens of seniors. Did you sign anything? With trembling hands. Margaret looked at the paper. Yes, we signed it last night. We sold our $500,000 home for $50,000. Clarence's heart sank. He'd been a cop for 28 years, caught hundreds of criminals. But this was personal. Margaret and Harold weren't just neighbors. They were like family. Aunt Margaret, don't panic. I'll take care of it. How, Clarence? The papers are signed. We already got the money. Clarence put a hand on her shoulder. Because I'm not just a retired cop. I'm still a cop. And I'm going to handle this with my old partner. Clarence rushed into his house and grabbed the phone. He dialed the number from memory. Bob Richardson. Bob, it's Clarence. Clarence, how you doing, buddy? It's been a while. Bob Richardson, 66 years old, was a short, blonde white man. He'd spent 30 years in the Detroit Police Department. For the last 15 years, he'd served in the Financial Crimes Unit. Bob, I've got an emergency. Remember Richard Williams? Bob went silent. You mean the real estate scammer? The one we were after 15 years ago? The very same. Bob, he just conned my neighbors, Margaret and Harold Thompson. They're 83 and 85. What? Bob's voice sharpened. That bastard's still out there. Yeah, and this time, it's personal. Aunt Margaret is like family to me. Bob took a deep breath. He'd been Clarence's partner for 30 years. They tackled the toughest cases together. And they both knew justice didn't care about age. How much money are we talking? He got their $500,000 house for $50,000. That scumbag. Bob growled. All right, Clarence. Let's meet. This time, we're taking Richard Williams down for good. Bob, we're not cops anymore. Clarence, did you ever stop being a cop? Clarence smiled. No, me neither. I'll be at your house tomorrow morning. The next morning, Bob was sitting at Clarence's house. Both of them were drinking coffee. Going through old police files. Clarence, I found Richard Williams' file. Bob opened a thick folder. How did this guy get away 15 years ago? Remember, lack of evidence. His lawyer was too good. So what do we have now? Clarence thought for a moment. The forged documents Margaret and Harold signed. But that might not be enough. Bob smiled. Clarence, you're forgetting something. I was in financial crimes. I can find this scumbag's tax evasion, fake companies, and money laundering records. You think those records still exist after 15 years? Bob Richardson doesn't delete anything. Bob picked up his phone. I've still got a few contacts. 2 hours later, Bob's desk was covered in documents. Clarence, look at this. Bob held up a sheet. Richard Williams is scammed 23 elderly people in the last 5 years. Total damage, $2.3 million. 23 people. Clarence was stunned, and none of them reported it, because seniors feel ashamed, or they just don't know what to do. Clarence stood up. Bob, this isn't just about Margaret and Harold anymore. I know. 23 families. Some of them probably have kids, grandkids, and this piece of trash stole from all of them. They looked at each other. 28 and 30 years of police service between them. They might have retired, but their sense of justice never had. Bob, you got a plan? Bob smiled. Clarence, you're going to be a fake client. We're going to catch Richard Williams red-handed. But evidence, I'll set up an audio recorder, hidden camera. This time, he won't get away. Isn't it risky? We're not young anymore. Bob stood up and shook Clarence's hand. Clarence, we were partners for 28 years. Did I ever leave you hanging? No, I'm not starting now. That evening, Clarence called Richard Williams. Hello, this is Clarence Henderson. I'm from the Elmwood neighborhood. My neighbor Margaret Thompson spoke highly of you. I'm thinking of selling my house too. You could hear the excitement in Richard's voice. Of course, Mr. Henderson, I could stop by tomorrow. Perfect, but one condition. I need cash fast. Can you move quickly? That's my specialty. Mr. Henderson, you'll get the best service. The next day, Richard was sitting in Clarence's living room. Bob was secretly in the backyard, recording everything through the window. Mr. Henderson, your house is probably worth about $400,000. Clarence was playing along. For $100,000. That's a lot. Yes, but I've got a special offer for you. I'll buy your house today, and I'll give you $40,000 in cash. $40,000 in cash, yes. And we can close the deal today. Richard pulled out forged documents from his portfolio. The same paperwork. The same scam. Mr. Henderson, if you sign here, your money will be ready tomorrow. Clarence paused before signing. What did your other clients say? Were they satisfied? Richard smiled. Of course, Margaret and Harold Thompson were very pleased. Really? I talked to them. They looked pretty upset. Richard's face changed. What do you mean? You talked to them, they told me they sold their $500,000 home for $50,000. Richard stood up. Mr. Henderson, those matters are confidential. Confidential? Clarence stood up too. So is scamming the elderly for 15 years? Richard's face went pale. Who are you? Just then, Bob walked in through the door. I'm Bob Richardson, retired financial crimes detective. And you're Richard Williams, a wanted con artist. Richard tried to run, but Clarence had already shut the door. Richard, you got away 15 years ago. You're not getting away this time. Richard Williams was cornered. He had scammed elderly people for 15 years without ever being caught. Now he was standing in front of two retired cops. You're not even police anymore. Richard shouted. Clarence responded calmly. You're right, Richard. We're not cops anymore, but we're just citizens. And we have proof that you scammed 23 seniors. What proof? Bob pulled out his phone. We've been recording everything for the last 2 hours. The fake documents, your scam offer, and your confession about Margaret Thompson. Richard's face shifted. I didn't confess anything, Clarence smiled. Richard, I worked in fraud for 28 years. You just admitted to scamming Margaret out of her house. Bob added, and I was in financial crimes. I've got your shell companies, your tax evasion records, your dirty money trails. Richard panicked. You guys set me up. This was a trap. Yeah, it was. Clarence confirmed. We tried to trap you 15 years ago too. This time, we succeeded. Richard collapsed into a chair. What do you want? Bob answered, simple. You're going to pay back Margaret and Harold. And you're going to return money to the 23 families you scammed. I don't have that kind of money. Clarence placed a hand on his shoulder. Richard, you've been running scams for 15 years. That's $2.3 million. Where is it? I spent it all. Bob chuckled. Richard, I worked financial crimes for 15 years. I'll find your offshore accounts. Clarence pulled out his phone. I'm calling the Detroit Police Department. Now Richard screamed. Okay. I'll return the money. All of it. Yes, all of it. Bob stepped forward. Richard, this isn't just about giving the money back. You scammed 23 families. You're going to prison. Please, I can change. Clarence paused. He'd arrested hundreds of criminals in his 28-year career. Some were truly remorseful. Others just hated being caught. Which one are you right now, Richard? I'm really sorry. What I did to those elderly people, it was horrible. Bob looked at him. Then prove it. How? Start by paying back Margaret and Harold. Then repay the others. And then turn yourself in. Richard hesitated. He'd been free for 15 years. He didn't want to imagine the years he'd spend behind bars. If I turn myself in, I'll help you. I'll expose other scammers too. Clarence and Bob exchanged a look. With 28 and 30 years on the force, they'd learned one thing, real. Justice isn't just punishment, it's redemption too. All right, Richard. But first, you're going to apologize to Margaret and Harold. 1 hour later, Richard Williams stood at Margaret and Harold's front door with Clarence and Bob. When Margaret opened the door and saw Richard, she stepped back in fear. Clarence, that's the man who... Aunt Margaret, please stay calm, Clarence said gently. Richard has something to say. Richard lowered his head. Mrs. Thompson, I wronged you terribly. I scammed you out of your home. I'm sorry. Harold stepped outside. Sorry doesn't cut it, young man. I know, sir. That's why I brought your money back. Richard pulled out a bag with $450,000. I gave you only $50,000 for your $500,000 home. Here's the rest, all for $150,000. Margaret's eyes welled with tears. Is this real? Clarence smiled. It's real, Aunt Margaret. Your home is still yours. Harold looked at the cash. And what happens to this young man now? Bob answered, he's turning himself in. And he'll pay back the others too. Margaret looked at Richard. She was 83 years old, had taught for 60 years. Young man, are you truly sorry? Richard's eyes filled with tears. Yes, ma'am, deeply sorry. And is an apology enough? No, ma'am. That's why I'm going to prison, and I'll never do something like this again. Margaret turned to Harold. They had been married for 60 years. They could read each other's thoughts with a glance. Harold, what do you think? Harold looked at Richard. Young man, how old are you? 45. Sir, I'm 85. 45 isn't too old to start over. But this time, you better do it right. Richard nodded. Yes, sir. I'm learning, Margaret added. Clarence, Bob. I don't know how to thank you. Clarence smiled. We're neighbors. Aunt Margaret, neighbors look out for each other. Bob added, and besides, we're not retired cops. We're still cops at heart. The following week, Bob and Clarence visited a different family each day. The 23 family scammed by Richard Williams. Eleanor Martinez, age 78, had sold her $300,000 home for just $30,000. George Washington, age 82, had sold his $250,000 house for $25,000. Rose Chen, age 85, had sold her $100,000 property for only $40,000. Every story was the same: old age, loneliness, urgent financial need, and Richard Williams' fake promise of help. Each time they visited a victim, Bob would say the same thing: justice delayed is still justice delivered. And Clarence would add, no matter your age, we can all stand up against injustice. Richard Williams kept his word. He repaid every single family, a total of $2.3 million. Then, he turned himself in. 3 months later, Richard Williams was on trial. In the front rows of the courtroom sat all 23 families. Margaret and Harold were there. So were Clarence and Bob. The judge looked at Richard. Mr. Williams, you are charged with defrauding 23 elderly citizens. How do you plead? Richard stood. Guilty, Your Honor, and deeply remorseful. The fact that you repaid the victims is commendable, the judge said, but it does not reduce the severity of your crimes. I understand, Your Honor. The judge delivered the sentence, 8 years in prison, followed by 5 years of supervised release. Richard accepted the verdict, but as he was being led out, he stopped beside Margaret. Mrs. Thompson, I know you may never forgive me, but I had to say this when I get out of prison. I'm going to start an organization to help the elderly. Margaret smiled. Richard, it's never too late. 6 months later, big changes had come to the Elmwood neighborhood. Clarence and Bob had founded the Neighborhood Protection Center. Every week, they held safety workshops for seniors and educated them about fraud prevention. Margaret and Harold continued to live happily in their home. With the $450,000 returned to them, Harold had received critical medical treatment, and Margaret had undergone heart surgery. Their children had even started visiting more often. Since Richard Williams' case had made the news, dozens of other elderly victims across the country came forward with similar stories. The FBI launched a special task force to investigate senior fraud. That Saturday morning, Clarence and Bob sat in Margaret's garden. Clarence, Bob asked, do you ever regret not retiring for real? Clarence looked over at Margaret's rose garden. Bob, I'm 64, but I can't sit still when I see injustice. Bob smiled. Same here. Besides, this work keeps us young. Margaret came out with tea. Boys, I can never thank you enough. Clarence stood up and hugged her. Aunt Margaret, your family. And family protects each other. Bob added, and we're not done protecting yet. Margaret wiped her eyes. You two are my angels. Retired police angels. Clarence and Bob laughed. Aunt Margaret, Clarence said, real cops never retire. Bob nodded. Neither does justice. As the sun set that evening, the three friends sat together, sipping tea in the garden. Margaret, age 83, Clarence, 64, Bob, 66, 3 generations, 3 different stories, united by one shared value: justice. And in Elmwood, the elderly were finally safe, because two retired officers never stopped protecting them. Retired, but never done. If you support justice for the elderly, subscribe and mention where you watched it in the comments.